Disclaimer: this story contains mature themes intended for adult viewers. Viewer discretion is advised. It was the kind of touch that wasn't supposed to happen anymore, not between us, not after everything. His hands found my hips in the quiet of our kitchen, fingers pressing in with a firmness that sent a shiver through my spine. My breath caught, then escaped in a long, unsteady sigh, one I didn't even realize I'd been holding. This wasn't how our mornings usually went. Most days, we passed each other like strangers sharing the same address, our words clipped, our eyes avoiding the truths we didn't dare speak aloud. But in that moment, his touch felt both wrong and achingly familiar, like a memory sneaking back when you've sworn to forget. My husband, Daniel, had once been the center of my world. We used to stay up until sunrise talking about everything and nothing, our laughter filling every corner of our tiny apartment. But lately, I could feel him slipping away, not in a sudden, dramatic way, but in small, quiet fractures. Missed dinners. Half-answered texts. Smiles that didn't quite reach his eyes. I told myself it was just stress, but deep down, I knew better. And then there was me, Maya. I wasn't innocent in all of this either. I'd built my own walls, brick by brick, pretending I was fine while secretly replaying every moment where I'd felt unseen. I missed being wanted, not just as a wife, but as a woman. I missed that unspoken electricity that used to spark between us without warning. Somewhere along the way, we had stopped looking at each other the way lovers do. Yet, standing there with his grip firm on my hips, I couldn't tell if this was the beginning of something being repaired, or the cruel reminder that we were only acting for the sake of appearances. His breath was warm against my ear, his voice low, almost hesitant, as he whispered my name like it was something fragile. I wanted to turn around, to see his eyes and read what was hidden there, but fear kept me still. That's when I noticed it, the faint scent on his shirt. It wasn't my perfume. Daniel didn't move his hands right away. His thumbs brushed slow, deliberate circles against my sides, a touch that felt too tender to belong to a man I barely spoke to anymore. I could feel the steady rhythm of his breathing, and it made me painfully aware of how in sync we used to be, how our bodies once understood each other without words. I closed my eyes, just for a moment, letting the warmth of him seep in. But then, almost as quickly, the warmth tangled with something colder, suspicion. That scent, it lingered. Sweet, floral, unfamiliar. My mind started tracing scenarios I didn't want to imagine, and I hated that they felt believable. We used to have rules. Not spoken ones, but the kind that formed naturally between people who loved each other. We shared everything, our fears, our failures, our victories. But lately, Daniel had been pulling pieces of himself away, tucking them into places I couldn't reach. And I'd started doing the same. It was easier than asking questions I was afraid to hear the answers to. His voice broke the silence. "You've been distant," he said, almost accusingly, though his tone was soft. The irony stung. I wanted to ask him who he'd been close to instead, but the words stuck in my throat. I knew that once spoken, they couldn't be taken back. I turned slightly, enough to catch his profile. His jaw was tight, his gaze fixed on some point beyond me. There was a time I could read every flicker of his expression, but now his face felt like a locked door. I wondered if he still looked at me the same way when I wasn't watching, or if someone else had replaced that gaze. "Maybe we've both been distant," I said finally, my voice quieter than I intended. He didn't answer right away, and the silence between us felt heavy, charged. When he did speak, it was only to say my name again, softer this time, almost pleading. And then, his hands slipped away. The loss of contact was sharp, almost physical. He stepped back, and I felt the space between us widen in ways I couldn't measure. I didn't turn to face him. I just stared ahead, wondering if the ground beneath us was quietly shifting, or if it had already given way. Daniel didn't stay in the kitchen long after that. He mumbled something about a call he had to take and disappeared down the hallway, leaving me with the faint echo of his touch and the soft hum of the refrigerator. I stood there for a while, hands pressed to the counter, trying to steady the thoughts racing in my head. It wasn't just the perfume. It was the way his eyes had avoided mine when I turned toward him. The way his voice carried a different weight, like he was choosing his words too carefully. Later that afternoon, I found myself replaying our mornings from months ago, how he'd wrap his arms around me before the coffee even brewed, murmuring half-awake compliments into my hair. Back then, I felt sure of us. Now, every gesture felt loaded, every absence felt like proof. When he came home that evening, I noticed another small change. He lingered at the doorway, scrolling through his phone before stepping inside. His smile, when it finally came, looked practiced. "How was your day?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Busy," he said quickly, slipping past me to set down his briefcase. He didn't elaborate. He never does anymore. I followed him into the living room, catching the way his fingers tightened around his phone when a message buzzed through. He glanced at the screen, then flipped it face down on the coffee table. That tiny motion felt like a flare in the dark, quick, subtle, but impossible to ignore. Trust is strange. You don't notice it slipping until you start looking for signs it's gone. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, that he was just protecting work emails or avoiding distractions. But a quiet voice in my head whispered that I used to be the distraction he wanted most. That night, lying beside him, I could feel the gulf between us and the inches of space that separated our bodies. He turned away first, his breathing steady, while I stared at the ceiling, wondering if he was awake, wondering if his mind was somewhere else entirely. The next day, my friend Lila noticed. Over coffee, she leaned closer, her tone gentle but edged with concern. "You're different lately," she said. "Is everything okay with Daniel?" I hesitated, not ready to unpack the tangled truth. But I told her enough, about the distance, the changes, the perfume. Lila's brow furrowed. "Be careful," she warned. "Sometimes the signs are exactly what they look like. And sometimes, they're worse." Her words stayed with me as I walked home, the autumn wind biting at my cheeks. I didn't want to imagine worse. But with every glance, every pause, every carefully chosen word from Daniel, the mystery of what was happening between us grew heavier. And in that weight, desire and suspicion became inseparable. That night, the rain came hard against the windows, a steady rhythm that felt almost too loud for the silence in our bedroom. Daniel was lying on his side, back to me, his breathing deep but uneven. I lay there watching the faint rise and fall of his shoulders, wondering if he was pretending to sleep, or if maybe I was the one pretending we were still okay. I wanted to reach for him. My fingers itched to trace the curve of his spine, to find the spot between his shoulder blades where I used to rest my hand when we fell asleep. But something held me back. Maybe it was pride, maybe fear, or maybe it was the gnawing thought that if I touched him now, I might feel just how far he'd gone from me. When he finally rolled onto his back, our eyes met in the dim light spilling from the hallway. It was one of those looks that lasts only a second but leaves you shaken. His gaze was searching, almost soft, but shadowed by something I couldn't name. I couldn't tell if he wanted to pull me close or say goodbye. "Daniel," my voice was small, but it cut through the quiet. "Are we okay?" His jaw tightened, and he exhaled slowly, like the question was heavier than he could hold. Instead of answering, he reached out, his hand finding mine beneath the blanket. The warmth of his skin sent a rush through me, a reminder of everything we once were, everything I still wanted us to be. But even in that touch, there was hesitation, like he was holding on just enough to keep me from slipping, but not enough to pull me back. My heart ached in that fragile space between us. I could feel my breath trembling, could feel the tears pressing behind my eyes. I wanted to ask about the perfume, about the late nights, about the messages he kept hidden. I wanted to ask if I was still the woman he wanted to come home to. But I didn't. Because deep down, I was afraid I already knew the answer. Outside, the rain kept falling. Inside, so did we. The rain had eased by morning, but the air between us felt heavier than the night before. Daniel moved quietly, avoiding eye contact, his phone never leaving the counter where it buzzed twice before he finally silenced it. I caught the faint tension in his jaw each time it lit up. When he left for work, I stood at the window watching his car pull away, my reflection in the glass looking far more fragile than I felt comfortable admitting. That's when I saw it, his laptop bag, still resting by the door. Daniel never left it behind. I told myself I wouldn't. I told myself I'd respect his privacy. But my hand was already reaching for the zipper. Inside, between neat stacks of papers, was a small envelope. My name wasn't on it, but I recognized the handwriting instantly. Lila's. The note was short, but the words burned into me, tonight. Same place. I'll be there early. No signature. No explanation. Just enough to split the ground beneath my feet. Lila, my friend, my confidant, the one who'd warned me to be careful. My stomach turned as I thought about her concerned expression over coffee, her voice laced with something I had mistaken for empathy. Now I wondered if it had been guilt. By the time Daniel came home that evening, I had rehearsed a dozen confrontations in my head. But when he stepped through the door, wet from the drizzle outside, something in his face stopped me. He looked, almost nervous. His eyes searched mine like he was bracing for impact. Long day, he murmured, setting down his keys. I wanted to ask him where he'd been. I wanted to shove the note into his hand and demand the truth. Instead, I closed the space between us, stopping just short of touching him. I could feel the heat radiating off him, could smell the faint trace of that same perfume clinging to his jacket. Daniel, I whispered, my voice unsteady, is there something you're not telling me? His gaze locked on mine, and for a heartbeat, it felt like the world had narrowed to the space between us. Then his lips parted, not in an answer, but in something like hesitation, something almost vulnerable. The silence between us was electric, charged with a mix of longing and the threat of devastation. I didn't know if he was about to confess, or kiss me just to make me stop asking questions. Either way, I knew the truth was closer than ever, and I wasn't sure I was ready to hear it. Daniel didn't move. The tension between us felt like it could shatter with the smallest sound. Then, with a breath that seemed to steady him, he said, Maya, it's not what you think. I almost laughed at the cliché, but the sincerity in his voice stopped me. Then tell me, I said, my tone sharper than I intended. His eyes softened. Lila's been helping me. I've been planning something, for us. He reached into his jacket pocket, pulling out a small velvet box. My breath caught, but before I could react, he placed it on the coffee table, unopened. I know I've been distant. I know I've made you doubt me. I wanted it to be a surprise, but I can see now. I went about it all wrong. His voice broke slightly, and for the first time in months, I saw the man I'd fallen in love with, the one who spoke in raw truths instead of half-answers. Slowly, I opened the box. Inside was a delicate necklace, the pendant shaped like two interlocked rings. My fingers trembled as I touched it. Why? I whispered. Because I wanted to remind you, he said, stepping closer, that even when I've been lost in my own world, you're still the center of it. For a moment, the weight on my chest lifted. The distance between us seemed to dissolve as his hand cupped my face. But before I could lean into the comfort of it, another truth slipped from his lips, one that hit harder than the note in his bag. I wasn't lying about Lila helping me, but I didn't tell you everything. She and I, we used to be more than friends. A long time ago, before you and I met. The air in the room seemed to thin. My grip tightened on the necklace as 1,000 unspoken questions swirled through me. The gesture, the gift, the confession, it all felt tangled in a web of past and present. Daniel didn't look away. I'm telling you now because I don't want there to be any more shadows between us. And just like that, the choice was mine, to walk away with the truth, or stay with the weight of it. Daniel's confession hung between us like the final note of a song, fading, but impossible to ignore. I held the necklace in my palm, its cool metal pressing into my skin as if asking me to choose, to let the past define us or to carry it forward with the rest of our imperfect story. I should have told you sooner, he said quietly. I thought it didn't matter anymore. But I can see now, it mattered because I kept it from you. I took a slow breath, my mind still reeling. The thought of Lila and his past stung in ways I couldn't fully put into words. Yet, as I looked at him, his face open, his eyes searching for an answer, I realized I wasn't just weighing his mistake. I was weighing everything we'd built, everything we'd survived. I'm not sure if I'm ready to forgive, I said, my voice steady despite the ache in my chest. But I'm not ready to walk away either. Relief flickered across his face, though it was tempered with understanding. He stepped closer, his hands finding mine. Then let's rebuild, he said. No more shadows. We spent the rest of the night not fixing everything, but starting to talk, really talk. About the months of distance, the nights he'd chosen work over dinner, the fears I'd buried under silence. He listened without defending, and I spoke without holding back. It wasn't easy. It wasn't clean. But it was real. The next morning, I called Lila. The conversation was short, measured. She confirmed what Daniel had said, and though I could still feel the sting of betrayal in her earlier secrecy, I also understood her distance. The past was messy for all of us. Weeks passed, and while we didn't magically return to the way we were, we found new ways to meet each other halfway. The necklace became more than a gift, it was a reminder that love isn't just about the moments we shine, but about the cracks we choose to mend. And maybe that's what relationships are in the end, not perfect stories, but imperfect journeys, where trust is built, broken, and, if we're willing, rebuilt again. So if you're watching this, ask yourself, when faced with love's flaws, do you walk away, or do you stay and try again? Tell me in the comments, I want to hear your truth. And if you'd like to see where Daniel and I go from here, maybe there's a sequel waiting to be told.